What's going on, everybody? This is John. Welcome to the show. We're talking about improving your personal economy. And so I got a question for you. So what's more important, the U.S. economy or your personal economy? Well, what does that even mean? What's the difference between those things? So that's the questions that we're going to explore through this. It's going to be a pretty dense episode, so I'm just going to go ahead and apologize up front. It's going to be getting into something called the Austrian business cycle theory of economics, and it's really going to talk about why we're screwed, for lack of a better word. There's a saying out there talk about being red pilled or blue pilled or whatever. There's also one called being black pilled, meaning basically that everything's doom and gloom and that there's no recovering from any of this. So while I'm certainly going to draw a very stark picture, I certainly am not taking the black pill on this. I think there is room for hope. And at the end of this whole episode, not even just to mention the entire reason why I'm running Cashflow Veteran, is for this very idea in and of itself, to be able to thrive in whatever comes, being able to weather any of the storms that are coming our way. And there's many different things I'm going to delve into over the coming months, the coming years, as I really build out this brand of Cashflow Veteran. But suffice it to say that this idea of improving your personal economy is one of the foundational aspects of what it means to be a cash flow veteran. Beyond that, we're also going to talk a little bit about building your bank, because a lot of this stuff also not just about improving your overall income and growing your economic pie, your personal economic pie, but also learning how to actually save that also makes sense, and then how to redeploy it. And so those are basically the three tenets of being a cash flow veteran: is improving your personal economy, building your own bank, and then deploying that capital. And that could be for charitable causes, that could be for reinvestment back into your companies, that could be being seed money for other companies and stuff that are out there as well. So those are the big ideas and the big tenets behind it. So let's get into this idea of the US economy versus your personal economy. So right now, especially, people are constantly talking about the stock market as if the stock market is the economy. That is a lie. It is not the economy, but it is treated like it is. And even whether you're on CNBC or any of the other business networks and stuff, that's always what they're looking at. They're also looking at the jobs numbers that are out there. And that's kind of the dual mandate of what the Fed is supposed to be able to do, is to make sure that they create conditions or have conditions for optimal employment, while at the same time controlling the inflation rate to a acceptable margin or an acceptable inflation rate that's out there. So that's kind of the idea of what it is. And the reason why I even bring up the Federal Reserve to begin with anyway, the quasi-private institution that basically it allows the Treasury to be able to actually create money out of nothing. And that's really where the government and the private side kind of come together, even though technically it's not part of the government, it functionally is. So the stock market itself is only an indicator, and it's a bad indicator at that, because it's constantly manipulated by the very institution that I talked about, plus other large companies. That the closer and closer related a company is to the government through lobbying, through government contracts, through having its employees paying into certain pension systems, depending on what that is. That's very relevant for most military affiliated people as well. And I will get into that a little bit later as well. But it's also a means for to measure the inflation. It's also a means to actually socialize the losses of these companies. It's where the wealthy, the well-connected to the government and to these bigger companies, transfer wealth from the middle and lower classes into these assets that they have. And they're the ones that get to control a lot of this. So I will be working on a more thorough analysis of this eventually in the context of thrift savings plan, the blended retirement system, even some of the old retirement systems, how we got to the retirement system that we had. And it's going to be kind of in a series of podcast articles. And eventually I'm also going to do an ebook. And I'm still trying to decide whether I'm going to talk about the retirement system, but also in the context of the military industrial complex. And I know that term, sets the hackles off of some people. Like, oh, here we go. Here's the conspiracy theory that comes along with some of this stuff. But I think there's a case to be made that these two things are intimately related, but I also kind of want to talk about it from two different perspectives. So I'm still deciding on whether I want to talk about both of those ideas in one ebook or whether I'm just going to break those up. It'll probably just be broken up because I think there's plenty of material there to really get into. So, that ebook will be an application of the Austrian business cycle theory to government contractors, the DoD, retirement planning, the finances of the military medical system. So that's obviously the VA, that's TRICARE, you name it. And then all the benefits of military membership while simultaneously eroding the very financial structure that our country is based on. And no, our current monetary system, our current fiscal system is not a free market, and it is not capitalism per se. So what is capitalism? So this is something that always sets off a lot of socialist type thinking people. And I also want to draw this out real quick. I really do believe that there are some people out there that really kind of want to see everything burn. But for the most part, people who are pushing socialist policies, I don't think they're doing it out of malice, out of spite, because they believe that capitalism is exploitative by nature. They see it as an evil, and they're trying to do the right thing. Now, whether I get someone out there to accept whether capitalism is also coming from the perspective of trying to actually fix the problems and actually is fair and actually does, in my mind, better for people in individuals rather than exploiting those individuals is up for debate. But I really do hope that anybody coming into this conversation, no matter where you believe, is at least coming to it with the perspective that we are trying to help people, that we're not trying to hurt people. It's just that we disagree on the application of any one of these things actually doing what it says it's going to do. So I can take that fair criticism from somebody so long as they're coming at it from a perspective of understanding we're still trying to do the right thing. We just disagree on the application of what that might be and the specifics. So what is capitalism? So capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or businesses own capital goods. So I picked this off basically of Investopedia, and I'll continue with this a little bit more because I want to draw out some distinctions here. The production of goods and services is based on supply and demand in the general market, known as a market economy, rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or a command economy. And so these are the market economy versus the command economy. And this is also where the breakdown between what is capitalism versus what socialism also lies. So they continue. The purest form of capitalism is a free market or laissez-faire capitalism. That is what I prescribe to. Again, they go on. Here, private individuals are unrestrained. They determine where to invest, what to produce, what to sell, and at which prices the exchange for goods and services. The laissez-faire marketplace operates without checks, without controls. And today, most countries practice a mixed capitalist system that includes some degree of government regulation of business and ownership of select industries. Teen Vogue actually goes into this too. And, I was picking at a couple different perspectives that are there. And Vogue tends to be, certainly has a more left-leaning bias. And you can tell even in the article that they have, but they actually did a pretty good job in my mind of going through and just kind of reporting the facts, even though there are subtle distinctions that they have in there that certainly tells you kind of where they're coming from. And that's fine. So it's an article about what capitalism is and actually uses a comparative analysis of what capitalism versus socialism is. And so, and they actually do a pretty good job going into it. And it's very similar to what I just talked about. But what they will talk about is they get into a little bit more of what the exploitative nature of capitalism is. So it's kind of the pros and the cons. And a little bit when the cons come, and they talk about the bad side of it, they are talking from a social justice kind of side. So I certainly understand where they're coming from when they're talking about something like that. Now, one other site that I like going to is thebalance.com. And they also did something similar as a comparative analysis, but they also go further and talk about the context of capitalism versus fascism versus socialism versus communism. So they actually break it down even further. So the United States is one example, and this is from The Balance. But it doesn't rank among the top 10 countries with the freest markets. And I want to drive that home. We don't have the freest economy in the world. In fact, I would argue that we haven't had the freest economy in over 100 years. Now, we've benefited from certain things, and we'll get there in a sec. So The Balance continues on. They talk about that according to the Index for Economic Freedom, it bases its ranking on 9 variables, including lack of corruption, low debt levels, and protection of private property rights. In the top 10 capitalist countries, according to this list, and this comes from the Heritage the 2019 Index of Economic Freedom World Rankings by the Heritage Foundation. So the top 10 most capitalist countries: Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Australia, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United Arab Emirates, and Taiwan. And we come in 12th on this list. So I still think the United States is the greatest place to live on earth for a variety of reasons. But our foundations certainly are based in the free market, but even the free market has almost always been constrained, even from the founding. They even tried to apply, lessons learned of failed centralization of the fiscal and monetary policy, and that you're just like, what kind of word garble is that? What are you even talking about? Well, the notion of it's not worth a continental, that phrase, that saying came out of the revolutionary period when we tried to just print as much money to pay for things, and it caused devastating inflationary effects that the money was not worth the paper it was printed on. And these are ideas that a lot of conservative types will talk about. They'll put out there, whether people want austerity measures or something like that. They'll criticize the inflationary piece of it, and they'll talk about that. And those are great sayings, and those are great things to put out there. But you're not going far enough in the analysis when you hear something like that or you say something like that. You really have to understand where it comes from. And there is a body of work that really discusses that. So honestly, we're actually still currently just riding the wave of the economic power from kind of the Gilded Age Industrial Revolution. Basically, after the Civil War, you have to build a whole bunch of stuff back up, with the Industrial Age really taking off, especially in the northern states that were there. But then also being on the winning side of 2 world wars. I mean, we were largely untouched. I mean, yeah, Pearl Harbor happened, but still, we were largely untouched, as where the rest of the Western world was utterly devastated by it. And the other superpowers that were growing up also were economically devastated by the warfare that was there. And so coming out of that, even with some of the policies that hold us back as a market economy. Now, we're not a free market economy. We haven't been really a free market economy for a long time, but specifically since the 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created. But then on top of that, when the income tax is instituted. Now there's a whole history that goes on with that. So I don't want to make you think that those specifically are the things that those creations have been. It's really the evolution from those that have caused a large problem. Now, I would also argue that each one of those have fundamental flaws to begin with, which is why we shouldn't have them. I'm all for in the Fed. I'm all for getting rid of the individual tax. I get rid of all taxes. All taxes should be abolished. The Federal Reserve should be gone, and we should open up a 100% free market economy. If we do that, I promise you, we will shoot up to the #1 most capitalist country that's out there, and you'll see prosperity on a scale that we have never seen. If everything is unprecedented these days, I promise you, if we actually went to a free market economy, it would be one of the greatest swells that rises all ships. It would be phenomenal. But am I going to get that? No, probably not. So our current economy more reflects kind of the mercantilism or pseudo-fascism. So, and I guess I should describe these a little bit more, but I'll finish this thought. So our current economy more reflects a mercantilist system and a pseudo-fascist system where the more connected a business is to the government, the more likely it will find itself today on the S&P 500 or major index funds, and will likely advocate or lobby for laws that are preferential in treatment to those industries and to those companies. So they're the ones that get to benefit when the money is printed from being able to spend it first, letting the inflationary stuff trickle out over time, where when we finally get the money through paychecks and through other stuff, through our labor, that money is worth less than what it was when it was originally printed and given to the industries that are most connected to the government or most connected to the Federal Reserve, which is why the banking industry was created, why the Federal Reserve was created from the banking industry, with JP Morgan Chase, with their wild connections between the European central bankers and our central bankers and different government agents when they all met and actually got it created. So mercantilism, what the heck is mercantilism? So for about 200 to 300 years, as best I understand, from basically the 16th century up to the 18th century, you had the monarchies of the West that were starting to create different structures of business and structures of company. So they were the ones that were actually creating the corporation, the LLCs. And this is where the idea of them sending ships across whether that was for slave trade, whether that was for other types of trade. They wanted to protect those companies, those corporations, from losses if they lost them at sea. That way, the investors that were there were able to do that. The issue is that under the monarchy, you still had to go as a patron to ask for the rights for these types of things from the government. You couldn't just go over here and stamp your flag down and say, this is mine. You had to go through the government system in order for any of that to happen, which is how a lot of the colonies got broken up in the first place. So the idea of mercantilism that I kind of want you to understand is that you had to be connected to the government, and it was a way, this is where tariffs also came from. It was a way to protect the crown and the crown's cash, the crown's gold, from being able to maintain its ability to trade on an open market, or maybe not necessarily an open market, but at least to maintain its purchasing power as a medium of exchange. So whether that would be the French franc or any of the other types of francs that were, or monetary devices that were out there, they typically were always in kind of gold or silver, which was a free market solution that predated the mercantilist system. But they were using it as a way to be able to protect the ability of that country, of that monarchy, to be able to maintain its purchasing power on the international stage. And which is why they did tariffs, and they tried to block other people from doing stuff or hurt. This is also kind of partly, from what I understand, at least in our modern context, where a lot of this financial warfare kind of came from as well. So again, and I'll re-explain this. So mercantilism was an economic system of trade that spanned from the 16th century to the 18th century. Mercantilism was based on the principle that the world's wealth was static, and consequently, many European nations attempted to accumulate the largest possible share of that wealth by maximizing their exports and by limiting their imports via tariffs. The one thing that they didn't understand, especially prior to the Industrial Revolution, was that although somebody was going to lose a job because a new innovation or automation had replaced it, nobody at the time could see beyond that to see the other opportunities of employment that would actually line up. If a machine can do the work that 20 people can do, then why would you necessarily have those 20 people to be doing that job? The corollary to that argument is, well, now those people are out of the job. But that's an opportunity for them to actually go into higher orders of skill, higher orders of industry, in order to bring about and actually make things more efficient. The fact that something else is doing the work now allows them to do other work. So yes, in the short term, they might be out of the job, but it opens up a lot more opportunities to be able to do things. That's also a huge argument that continues today between socialism and fascism. It's the one that's coming up about the universal basic income, the UBI, and why automation is taking over our jobs. And the thing is a lot of people cannot see. They see everything as static. They see one pot of money, and they don't see the innovations that actually are able to grow the overall value. Because what is money at the end of the day? It's really just a store of value, and those things are decided on individual levels. And it's a very complicated question to have. It's a very complicated topic to really go through, but it's not finite. And that's the thing. It is finite in the sense that there are only a certain number of resources. That is absolutely true. But as we find new innovations and using those resources better and driving down the cost of production, the cost of manufacturing, the cost of getting those products to market, and the more efficient that system runs, the better off we're actually able to manage those things. The more that you centrally plan, the less that happens. So when it comes to the idea of fascism, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is there's an old adage, an old phrase by real estate investors that kind of says, own nothing but control everything. I'm pretty sure Robert Kiyosaki may have said it. That might be a misattribution. But I know of all the real estate investing courses and all the other stuff that I've gone to, like really researching lots of different types of vehicles for wealth and real estate investing, that's one of the big ideas that people have is hey, you don't want to own everything, but you do want to control things through contracts, through deals, and all that kind of stuff. So this one idea, though, undermines the free market and ensures our economy becomes more closely tied to central planning of the economy, where the U.S. ultimately pursues a more pseudo-fascist, pseudo-socialist, or full-blown fascism or full-blown socialism. And I think you can kind of see that playing out even today in June 2020 of kind of what's going on. Even though there's a lot of other cultural things that are going on, there's still that idea of where we should go. One is more nationally based, and the other one is more based on basically the ideas of Marx. And while that used to scare a lot of people, that certainly doesn't scare a lot more people today. A lot of our youth, a lot of people from my generation going through government schools and going through college systems, this is the main idea that it's actually out there, and how Marx has become much more acceptable. It's why people wear Che Guevara t-shirts. Even though you look at Nazis and you go, how terrible it is to be a Nazi, you're a Nazi racist, blah, 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 blah. Well, it turns out that phrase doesn't have any meaning anymore when you consider how many more people were murdered and in the gulags than were in the concentration camps. They're both evil. But when you're talking about the total impact of what's going on and how much suffering one was caused, I'm sorry, but communism takes the cake on that one. So enter the Austrian business cycle theory. So our economy typically comes from the Keynesian model. That is what most people are taught. And today it's kind of, after a lot of the Keynesian principles have basically been turned over on their head, have been disputed, and have been shown that they don't hold water. They can't even hold a candle to their explanations of things. And they keep coming up with all these exceptions for the rules. So they still maintain their core belief with that model, even though they have to continually make exceptions in order to make it work, which is why it's been morphed basically into the modern monetary theory, or MMT. Don't worry, you don't have to go to this. It's kind of why I'm going through some of this. So I'm not going to explain those ideas, but I want to really go through is a couple of ideas from a couple of books. And I want to get into the Austrian business cycle theory a little bit more, because I think it has a little bit more impact and more relevancy to what's currently going on and what you need to do, rather than just trying to do a big comparison. I'm just going to tell you what I think is right, why I think it's right, and then we're going to get into what you should do about it. So there's a couple of different books that I'm kind of pulling from overall, but in order to kind of bring it back to you, there is a book out there called Family Inc. by a guy named Douglas McCormick. And I don't agree with everything he has, but there's so much good stuff that's in here that is practical advice for any individual, but specifically is things that can be applied to veterans, can be applied to active duty military, dependent spouses, you name it. And he's actually a veteran that has gotten into the financial sector a little bit more. And I do want to read you a little bit from what he has. So this is from one of the Fords that he has called With Appreciation for America's Armed Forces Service Members. So most are aware and can appreciate the sacrifices our country service members have made to ensure the safety and freedom since 9/11. They endure hardship, extended time away from loved ones, frequently putting themselves in harm's way for our collective benefit. However, there is much less appreciation for the financial sacrifices and the hardships many service members endure long after their service. In many cases, they are required to move numerous times during their service, making it difficult for other family members to maximize their professional opportunities, dependents, spouses, you know what I'm talking about. Their active duty experiences are often underappreciated in the actual professional fields, and they're not even taught. I mean, until you actually go to the transition assistance program, you're not even taught how to take what you learned in the military and actually effectively communicate what it will mean in a business sense. That is really the only effort that I've actually seen for that one class when you actually finally decide to get out, rather than having a more comprehensive way of being able to transfer those skills when the time is right. When they attempt to transition from the military. So they experience higher rates of disability, divorce, and homelessness than the general population. And all these factors threaten the financial security and welfare of our veterans. And he goes on to say that financial literacy can eliminate these challenges, but it can mitigate their impact. And that's one of the big reasons why he especially wrote this book, not just for military members, but I think this is true for most of the people who are in the lower classes, the middle class, maybe even the upper middle class. I mean, there are a lot of people that, even though they might make six figures a year, they're still living paycheck to paycheck, because our culture does not build a incentive for responsibility or having a high time preference, meaning that you can wait for things. You can delay gratification enough to wait for things. in the policies. I'm not just saying that our culture, it's specifically the laws and the policies and how banking and industry actually functions that also incentivizes to do that. So while we do have agency to do that and to make sure that we're doing it right, um, at what point does our agency start and stop? And at what point do we hold someone accountable for having the incentive out there in the first place? So I did want to kind of talk about and introduce him real quick because we're going to come back to him and a lot of his solutions and his practical advice, but I want to build the case a little bit more. So there's another book that we're going to get into a little bit. And again, I encourage you to actually go buy these books. I don't have a link, so there's nothing that you're going to buy through me. Maybe one day I'll go onto Amazon and actually put these out there for you. And maybe you can find free versions that are out there. I don't know. Certainly they got to have used versions on Amazon. Again, maybe one day I'll put some of this stuff on Amazon. But The Everything Bubble by Graham Summers. A little bit of a doom and gloom book, but it is one of the most comprehensive books that I've seen that really breaks down how our economy has gotten to this point. And I'm sure this new COVID-19 stuff that could be added here makes it even more predictive in nature. So when our country's economic policy allows for negative interest rates, and it will, we've now added just another means of confiscation of wealth and another confiscation of a store of value. So what do I mean by negative interest rates? So there is the target federal funds rate that the Federal Reserve places out there. That's what they're trying to get to control the inflation. That is what, when they set that number and try to regulate that number to a degree, and this is how the big banking institutions trade between each other as well, but it's also kind of what sets the boundary, sets the lower limit for how they go about pricing their loan structures. Meaning that, hey, the interest rates are at a new low. Go buy a house now. So now that's the federal funds rate is lower than what you're going to get in a mortgage rate. The issue is this is also what drives your interest rate in your bank account, your savings account, your checking account. All of the rates are based off of this number, and we're heading into negative territory. And a lot of people really disagree with that. I from everything I've read, from everything I understand, that is where we're headed. And I want to draw this out a little bit more to help you understand what I mean by using kind of a practical example. And he even says we're going to negative 3%, negative 5%. And I start this with just a negative 1% to show you what I mean. So as the government moves to ban physical cash, and yes, it's going to ban physical cash, you wouldn't want to get COVID-19 from a $20 bill, would you? Well, they're going to have to start having rates go negative in order actually to incentivize this before they can just outright ban the use of cash. So it gets rid of a lot of people's ability to be able to do that. It also means that they're able to control, if they can control the electronic movement of money, that also means that if they find something that you have that's less desirable, even though it's not hurting anyone else at all, it's another way for them to make sure that they can control your behavior. So from this, let's assume that the interest rate that the federal funds rate is actually having, and not just the interest rate that the federal funds target is, but specifically in your savings account, goes to a negative 1%. It's a negative 1% rate. But inflation, let's say, stays at 3%. So let's say that you're saving for a decent vehicle for yourself. Not something that's brand new, but certainly something that's gently used over a certain amount of time. And you're doing all the right things so far as finances. So you're delaying your gratification by saving for a car 3 years from now rather than buying it new today. You're paying off the debts that you have that are there. You're not trying to take on a whole bunch of new debt, which is why you're saving for a car. And you've gotten to the point where you're able to put $5,000 back per year in savings to be able to buy a new car. And you've given yourself, your car's going to maybe sunset. Maybe you want to get rid of the car in the next 5 years. You set 3 years as your goal, and you're going to pay for a moderately used car at $15,000. And let's just happen to say that it's a Toyota Camry or a Corolla or something like that. The most common car in the US is the Toyota Corolla. Let's just say that instead of buying a brand new car, you look at it today, it might be over $20,000 that you're buying it for today, but you can get it for $15,000 in the next 3 years. At least that's based on. So I'm also going to consider that $15,000 you're buying it for was as if everything was going to be static today, no inflation, no nothing, just from the natural depreciation of the car itself. If you actually compare apples to apples when you do it and you run the analysis, it's going to be $15,000 in 3 years based on that. Now they put the negative interest rate in place. Inflation stays at 3%. And again, I'm ignoring kind of inflation on the original side of this to say that it's 15K, because I kind of want to draw out what the impact of inflation is as well. So it's obviously not a perfect example, but it's going to get my point across. So aside from all the variables, from mileage condition to the diminishing value of it, let's just assume that we've picked the current model this year, and we expect it to be 15,000 in 3 years. With a 3% inflation rate, you need about $16,390.95 to pay for that car when the time comes to actually buy it. And that's obviously not including the license and the fees that the local government's going to want to steal from you just to allow you to drive on their roads. And by saving $5,000 a year, and you're putting away, and one of the things that I assumed is you could either put, $416 per month away, or you could just have $5,000 as a windfall every year that you keep. But you get $5,000 at the end of every year. The value of your cash is only going to be $15,454 and some change. So even if you're to save $5,000 per year, just based on 3% inflation, you're not going to have enough money for what that car would cost. You're actually going to come up short because of it. Just by inflation alone, you actually have to save $16,000 for a car that without inflation would normally be just $15,000 specifically. So you could actually make that work, right? But inflation is a thing. What I want to draw out at this point is the negative interest rate. So when you add the effect of a negative interest rate at holding up your money in savings, let's say, again, negative 1% interest rate, the cumulative effect of your negative interest rate during that saving period, so over that 3 years, if you're putting $416.67 per month into savings, it takes that from $15,454 and change, which were the first number that we calculated by saving $5,000 every year for 3 years. And at the end of the years, because of the negative interest rate on your savings account, you only have $12,649 and change. Ain't that some BS? So it's incentivizing even more borrowing. Why in the world would you try to save that $15,000 when you know it's only going to be worth over 12 in order to get there? Plus the inflation on actually accumulating any good that's out there, like a car, is still going to go up for inflation. The normal things that would happen to bring the cost down as a good would normally happen. And then you add inflation on top of that. Well, now it's outpacing you with that regard. And because you're saving, you're now actually getting outpaced even more because of it. So it's effectively a 4% interest rate or 4% inflation that you're having to combat at that point, which is a huge problem. So the problem in our personal lives is a borrowing problem. There's agency we have in order to understand that we're borrowing too much, but it doesn't seem fair that only the mechanisms we can use to build savings are highly regulated banks controlled by the very government entities and policies that have incentivized the very borrowing that's hurting the consumers in the first place. Again, we have agency to fight this and choose a different method, but we're severely limited in the amount of control that we can have on doing what we should do about it. They also make things illegal for you to do. There's a reason why you can't actually go use gold to pay for something, is because we have legal tender laws that only allow the US dollar to be used. I mean, it's also one of the hard functions of the cryptocurrency that's out there, right? So whether it's Bitcoin or any of the other ones, that's a huge issue that, as far as legal tender laws go, hopefully you can find a way to get around it, but technically it still might be illegal because they have a monopoly on the ability for you to spend money. And that's what this is all about. It's what our government is about. It's the monopoly on violence and a monopoly on financing. I mean, that's, for me, what it really comes down to, and one of the reasons why I'm a libertarian. One of the reasons why I'm quickly becoming an anarcho-capitalist. A person who is a free market anarchist at this point, not a violent one, but certainly one that just wants a better system. I want to be able to opt out. That's all I want. I want to opt out of the system. So going back to this, so that idea that I just talked about, whether it's incentivizing the very behavior that we're trying to combat. So the problem with the borrowing problem and all of the other mechanisms that are there that incentivize it, that's one of the main contributing factors to the boom and bust cycle. And it's not an accident. This is by design. And it serves as a means to transfer wealth from everyday people to the most wealthy, most well-connected, and government-connected, and people that are connected to the companies and all the other incestuous type of stuff that goes on with it. And then the only solution, quote unquote, is more government control over our lives. That's what I find most, just the craziest idea, is the reason why we're there in the first place. Literally, this is precisely why every government institution is fundamentally corrupt and flawed. The more centrally planned and the more controlled our economy is, the worse it gets. And the free market will be blamed, and the prescription will always be the same. It will be more government. The prescription are the same things that are causing the problem in the first place. This is the reason, or at least one of the major reasons, why I've become anti-war, anti-Fed, that means Federal Reserve, and anti-welfare system as well. And now I think the anti-war and the anti-Fed issue are actually a little bit bigger of a problem than the anti-welfare, um, for the same reason that I think the military retirement system or the military medical system is also not it's a factor, but it is not one of the key contributing factors to this whole thing. To me, it's the war issue and it's the Fed issue, and a lot of the other wars on drugs, war on terrorism, basically anything else that builds up the monopoly on violence, while also at this, simultaneously devaluing the dollar every day that it is allowed to. So this is why these ideas are why TRICARE, your VA healthcare, your retirement is part of the reason why it's bankrupting the country. Again, not the key reason in my mind, but certainly one of the things that is contributing to the bankrupting of the country to a point where I don't remember what book it was. I don't remember specifically what it was, but the time frame is the 1960s or 1970s. They're asking about reforms in the Social Security or in the Medicare system and the different welfare programs that are out there. And it's like, well, what are we going to do about not being able to provide some of this stuff? It's like, well, don't worry about it. It's not going to be an issue. We're still going to give people what they're owed. It's just that money won't be worth anything. And that is just one of the most cynical, sociopathic things that I've ever heard. And again, if I ever find that quote, I promise you I will come back to this episode and I'll put it right in. Anyway, so this is the realization and was the moment that kind of opened my eyes to having the need to build something that outthinks and outpaces the suicidal trend that we have in our economy. It's also matters that I find others who see the truth and actually take actions for themselves. It's the only way we fix this country. And I don't necessarily want to fix the country. I want to be able to fix the minds of people who I can interact with on a day-to-day basis, and also other people that are around. I want the ability to trade with whomever I want to trade with, and take on the risk myself. So, but it's by taking responsibility for ourselves to become entrepreneurs, to fight creatively, and to influence others who are actually ready to hear this message. Honestly, I don't see the one country coming out of this on the other side. I actually see that this is probably going to be more divisive than ever. And it will either be that they have to clamp down control so much, or people will start fighting to be able to free themselves, or they let people go and we have a divorce amicably.